The first time, I died screaming. I didn't even have time to understand what had happened before the darkness swallowed me whole. One moment, I was on the ground, pain blooming through my ribs, the taste of iron thick in my mouth. My breath came in ragged gasps, my limbs weak and trembling. The knife had missed my heart, but not by much. Even without looking, I knew the wound was bad. Too bad for someone like me, with no strength, no magic, no miracle to save me. I was going to die. And then he appeared. A golden-haired warrior draped in black, stepping into the alley like a shadow come to life. His presence alone was enough to silence everything, the ragged breathing of the thugs, the clatter of a knife dropping onto stone. Even the sound of my own heartbeat seemed to falter in his wake. Relief surged through me. Salvation. A hero had arrived. But then I saw his face. There was no anger in his eyes. No disgust for the thugs who had left me broken in the dirt. No righteous fury. Nothing I had expected from the kind of person who could stop men like these with just a look. Instead, there was something far, far worse. Hunger. Not the hunger of a man, but something deeper, more primal, something that made the air in my lungs turn to ice. His nostrils flared, his pupils dilated, just slightly, just enough for me to notice. He took in the scent of blood like it was something intoxicating, his breath hitching, his lips curling back. Not in rage. Not in disgust. But in longing. Something inside me screamed that this wasn't right. That this wasn't normal. That the man standing before me was no man at all. The thugs reacted first. One turned to run, the other reached for his weapon, a desperate attempt to defend himself. But it didn't matter. The moment the golden-haired warrior moved, the fight was over before it even began. A blur of motion. A gust of wind. Then, carnage. The first man didn't even get the chance to scream. The warrior's arm tore through him like paper, cutting clean through muscle, bone, and sinew. The second one, his body jerked, a broken sound catching in his throat before his head was wrenched to the side at an impossible angle. It didn't stop there. Limbs ripped apart. Flesh shredded. The wet, sickening sounds of tearing and squelching filled the alley, drowning out my own ragged breathing. Blood painted the walls, pooled at my feet, seeped into the cracks of the stone. And he was enjoying it. Not the way a sadist would. There was no cruel laughter, no gloating, no theatrical malice. It was something worse. Something natural. He was feeding. And then he turned to me. A slow, deliberate movement, like a beast savoring the last morsel of its meal. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, to push myself up, to move, to do anything but sit there, frozen, my blood mixing with the puddles of the dead. But I couldn't. The fear locked my body in place. It wasn't just terror. It was something deeper. Something instinctual, woven into the very fabric of my being. A transhuman dread. The mind-breaking realization that I was in the presence of something I was never meant to understand. His eyes met mine, and in that instant, I knew I wasn't being saved. I was prey. He moved. Too fast, too sudden, too unnatural. Teeth. Pain. Black. And then, the second time, I tried to run. My mind hadn't caught up with my body yet. Pure instinct took over, raw and desperate. One moment, I was staring into those gleaming, hunger-filled eyes, and the next, my legs were moving before I could even think. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just had to get away. I barely got 2 steps. Something struck me. No, crushed me. An unseen force slammed into my side, folding my body like a snapped twig. A sickening crunch filled my ears, and pain, searing, white-hot pain, exploded through my ribs. I didn't even get the chance to scream. My lungs collapsed. My breath hitched, then failed entirely. A wet gurgling sound bubbled up in my throat as something warm spilled past my lips. Blood. I choked on it, drowning before I even hit the ground. My vision blurred. My limbs twitched uselessly. The world was slipping away, but the pain refused to fade. My thoughts ran wild, screaming in fractured, incoherent panic. What happened? What hit me? Why can't I breathe? Then, footsteps. Slow, measured, unhurried. He was coming. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't beg. I tried to force air into my lungs, but all that came was more blood, filling my throat, bubbling past my lips, spilling down my chin. It hurt. It hurt so much. And yet, he took his time. Watching. Studying. Like he was savoring the sight of me breaking. My body convulsed. My vision tunneled. The alley, the blood, the golden-haired monster standing over me. It all blurred into a mess of color and darkness. Somewhere, in the fading edges of my mind, I realized something. I wasn't going to die quickly this time. This death was slower. Worse. I drowned, not in water, but in my own blood. And then, black. The third time, I tried to talk to him. My body trembled, but I forced myself to stay still. Running had done nothing. Fighting was never an option. If I had any chance of surviving, it had to be this. Words. Wait, stop. My voice cracked, but I pushed through, forcing the words out between ragged breaths. You don't have to do this. His eyes flicked to me. Cold, sharp, unreadable, but he didn't move. A flicker of hope sparked in my chest. Was he listening? Had I reached him? I swallowed hard and pressed on. I'm not your enemy. I don't want to fight. Please, just let me go. For a moment, he simply stared. His head tilted, as if considering my words. A pause. A long, dreadful pause. And then, he exhaled sharply. The sound sent ice skittering down my spine. His eyes half-lidded, his expression shifting from unreadable to something worse. Disappointment. You smell of blood. It was the only warning I got. Then the world twisted. A force like a wrecking ball slammed into my skull. I didn't even register the moment my feet left the ground, only the instant my head met stone. A wet, sickening crack. A blinding explosion of pain. Then, nothing. Black again. The fourth time, I tried to fight back. It was a joke. A bad one. I had nothing. No strength. No speed. No magic. Just trembling limbs, shallow breaths, and the distant, desperate hope that struggling would mean something. He had everything. Power. Precision. A presence so overwhelming it made the air feel thick, suffocating, crushing. But I still swung. A wild, clumsy punch, one that never had a chance of landing. My fist cut through empty air, my body lunging forward with all the force of a man who had nothing left to lose. He didn't move. He didn't need to. His eyes flicked to me, bored, almost disappointed. Then, a whisper of force. Not a gesture. Not a spell. Just an unseen pressure, shifting in the air between us. Then, pain. Horrible, unbearable, all-consuming pain. My ribs buckled. My arms snapped at unnatural angles. My legs crumpled beneath me, no longer able to hold my weight. I collapsed. I couldn't even scream. My body didn't belong to me anymore. It was just a shattered husk, a heap of broken bones and failing nerves. I heard a sound. A soft exhale, almost amused. Then the darkness took me. Black. The fourth time, I ran early. I didn't go to the alley. I didn't let it happen again. The moment I recognized the street, the moment my feet brushed against the stones where I had first died, I turned and ran. Not after being attacked. Not after seeing him. Before. Before it could start. Before I could be caught in something I didn't understand. I ran like my life depended on it. Because it did. I shoved past strangers, ignoring their protests. My breath came in short, ragged bursts, my legs burned, but I pushed forward. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. The further I ran, the heavier the air became. A presence slithered behind me, unseen but undeniable. Then, wind. Fast. Unnatural. I didn't dare look back. I knew. He was there. Somewhere. Maybe close. Maybe watching. Maybe waiting. I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs felt like they would burst, until my legs threatened to give out, until I reached the bridge, the furthest I had ever made it. Only then did I stop. Inhaling, exhaling, gasping for breath like a drowning man clawing for air. The city stretched before me, wide and open, but I felt no relief. My hands trembled. My vision swam. And then I saw them. My hands. They were clean. No wounds, no blood, no proof of the deaths I had suffered. But I saw it anyway. Phantom blood, dripping between my fingers, soaking into my skin, filling my lungs. I gagged. I doubled over, body convulsing. This time, when my stomach lurched, it wasn't blood that came up, just the half-digested remains of a meal I barely remembered eating. I retched again, and again, until there was nothing left but dry, shuddering gasps. And then, why? The thought crashed through my mind, louder than the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. Why is that monster killing me? Not just me. Why does he kill at all? The question sank deep, festering in the pit of my stomach, growing heavier with each passing second. And then, a presence. I froze. A gust of wind brushed past my ear. I wasn't alone. A hand touched my shoulder. I flinched. Every muscle in my body locked up, my breath catching in my throat. My skin prickled where I had been touched, as if the hand carried death itself. I bolted. Or, I tried. I scrambled away, my limbs weak, my balance unsteady. Terror had hollowed me out, and the only thing I could think of was move, move, move. But before I could get far, another hand grabbed me. Then another, firm, but not cruel. Strong, but not crushing. They held me steady, stopping me from collapsing outright. "Are you okay, sir?" The voice was calm, steady. Not him. Not the monster. Slowly, shakily, I was forced to look up. A young man. Tall, red-haired, blue eyes, piercing yet kind, studying me with concern. His presence felt different, strong, unwavering, but nothing like his. Relief flooded through me like a crashing wave. I was safe. But my body didn't understand that. The fear didn't vanish. My heart still pounded. My breath still came in sharp, uneven gasps. My vision blurred, my limbs felt distant, my thoughts sluggish. And then, dizziness. The world tilted. A deep, bone-deep exhaustion settled in my body, dragging me down like chains wrapped around my limbs. Am I bleeding? I thought I wasn't. My hands were clean. But then, why did I feel so lightheaded? I barely had time to process it before the darkness rose again. My body gave out. The stranger's hands caught me as I collapsed. Black. The 10th time, I tried warning the thugs. I knew what was coming. I had seen it before. Felt it. Died from it. So this time, I acted first. The moment I spotted them, the two men lingering at the alley's entrance, waiting for their next victim, I pushed forward, forcing my way through the crowd. "Don't go in there." They barely looked at me. I stepped closer, my pulse hammering in my ears. They need to listen. If they just leave, maybe this time. One of them finally turned, giving me a lazy, unimpressed glance. "What? You need to leave." I swallowed hard. "Right now." The second thug sneered. "Oh yeah? And why's that?" "Because if you don't, you're going to die." I didn't say it out loud. They wouldn't believe me. Then, a blur. A figure dashed past us, small, quick, urgent. A girl. Blonde, short-haired. She moved with impossible agility, her boots barely touching the ground as she vaulted off a crate and onto a windowsill. She didn't hesitate. Didn't glance back. Just ran. Up. Across the rooftops. Gone. The thugs barely reacted, blinking after her in confusion. But I knew. This was the moment. The exact moment. She had seen him. She had run. Which meant, the air shifted. No, not yet. I hesitated. If I told them the truth, they'd never believe me. But before I could figure out what to say, a hand grabbed my collar. "Listen, freak." Pain. A fist slammed into my gut, knocking the air from my lungs. I staggered back, coughing, gasping, my legs barely holding me upright. I saw it before I felt it, red dripping from my lip, sliding down my chin. Blood. Then, the air changed. Heavy, suffocating. I turned. Run. The instinct kicked in before I could think, before I could freeze. I bolted, straight into the alley. My feet pounded against the stone, my breaths coming in frantic, uneven gasps. I didn't stop. I couldn't. If I just ran far enough, if I just made it out the other side. Then I felt it. A presence. Not behind me. Ahead. The shadows at the alley's far end twisted. Something stepped forward. A silhouette. Tall. Cloaked in black. Golden hair catching the dim light. My stomach dropped. I skidded to a stop so fast my knees nearly buckled. I turned to flee, but I wasn't fast enough. He hadn't entered the alley. Not yet. But he was watching. Waiting. And when he finally moved, it wasn't toward me. It was toward them. The thugs had followed me. I saw it, the confusion on their faces as they stepped into the alley's entrance, too cocky, too slow to understand the mistake they had just made. Then, he inhaled. Long. Slow. Like he was savoring the scent in the air. His gaze flicked past me. Straight to them. I opened my mouth, to shout, to warn him, to say anything. But then, he moved. Faster than I could process. A blur of black. A flash of steel. Then, screams. Horrible, gut-wrenching, real. The sound of bodies hitting the ground. A splash of warmth across my face. I caused this. My body trembled, my breaths coming in short, shallow bursts. Then, silence. I didn't want to look, but I did. I saw him. Standing there, amongst the remains of what had once been people. Blood dripping from his fingertips. His eyes slid back to me. And then, he inhaled again. Still hungry. I tried to run. I never made it to the street. Black. The 20th time, I didn't move. I let the knife take me before he could. A quicker death, one of my own choosing. The midday sun beat down on the alley, casting sharp shadows against the crumbling walls. The scent of sweat, dust, and the lingering iron tang of blood clung to the air. The thugs lay scattered around me, groaning, broken, beaten down by my own hands. Their mockery had stung deeper than their blades ever could. I had tried to save them, to pull them from the path that led to their ruin, but they spat at my outstretched hand. So, I took them apart. Their weapons lay forgotten on the ground, one of them still slick with their own blood. I picked up a knife, its weight familiar, its edge sharp enough to end the cycle before it could begin again. My fingers curled around the hilt, steady, resolute. Then he arrived. The air grew heavy, thick with something far worse than fear, an all-consuming, astral dread that coiled around my lungs like a vice. The alley darkened, though the sun still burned above, as if the very world recoiled from his presence. A figure stood at the alley's mouth, clad in black armor that swallowed the light, polished like obsidian yet stained with something unseen. His golden blonde hair framed a face that could belong on the cover of a magazine, flawless, beautiful, inhuman. He was impossibly tall, towering like the tallest street lamp, yet it was his eyes that made the world stop. They turned red. A deep, unshakable knowledge settled into my bones. He would take his own. He would take me. I refused to give him the chance. With both knives in hand, I drove them into my stomach, tearing through flesh, twisting until the pain blurred into something distant. Blood poured down, soaking the ground, my vision fading at the edges. Behind me, the thugs coughed and choked on the scent of my sacrifice, their wounds still fresh, their bodies broken but alive. I had beaten them. I had saved them, but I would not be saved. The 21st time, I begged. It didn't work, but it took him longer to kill me. The midday heat pressed down, suffocating, the alley thick with the scent of blood, my blood. My knees scraped against the cobblestones, my fingers trembling as they clutched at his armor. "Please," I gasped. "Not this time." His golden hair glowed under the sunlight, too perfect, too pristine for something so monstrous. His crimson eyes burned into me, unreadable, unwavering. For the first time, he hesitated. Not mercy, just curiosity. Then the knife came, slow and deliberate, tearing through my stomach with measured cruelty. Fire spread through my body, pain blooming like a sick flower, but he didn't let me fall. His gloved hand caught my chin, forcing my gaze to meet his as my blood spilled, dark and hot, staining his fingers. And then he drank, lips pressed against the open wound, a shudder running through him as he fed. It wasn't gentle, wasn't careful. It was hunger, raw and consuming, like a mosquito gorging itself on life, like a vampire starved beyond reason. I choked, the pain twisting into something worse, something deeper. His grip tightened as he drank, as if afraid I'd slip away too soon, as if savoring every drop. The world blurred at the edges, my body grew colder. It took longer this time, but in the end, it always did. The 22nd time, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't just killing me. He was remembering. At first, I thought it was paranoia, the creeping unease twisting in my gut like a sickness. But then I saw it. The way he moved, the way his strikes no longer carried that slow, deliberate cruelty. No hesitation. No excess. His blade cut sharper, his steps landed with perfect precision, efficient. He was adapting. Every mistake I made, every desperate attempt to slip past him, every single death. I wasn't the only one who remembered. He was learning from my deaths. And now, the openings were vanishing. I couldn't stop him. I couldn't outrun him. So I did the only thing left. I screamed, "Help! A knight! A knight! Help me!" The sound ripped from my throat, raw and desperate, louder than I thought possible. The alley swallowed my voice, but the streets beyond, crowded, bustling, would hear. The people, the merchants, the guards. Someone had to hear. He paused, only for a breath, only for a flicker of a second. Then he lunged, but before his blade could reach me, a flash of red and white, a blur of movement, faster than thought. Desperation ripped through my voice, raw and shaking. The alley swallowed the sound, but beyond it, the streets, the crowds, the city, someone had to hear me. And then, something changed. A gust of wind rushed past, a flicker of white and red, movement so fast it barely registered before. Light. A sword descended, gleaming like a falling star, its brilliance almost unnatural under the afternoon sun. The air split around it, reality bending as if making way for something greater. And then, clang. Steel met steel. A force so immense that the very ground trembled beneath me. For the first time in 22 deaths, the Blood Angel stopped. Not because of me, but because he had arrived. The man before me stood tall, his stance effortless, but in it lay something absolute, something final. His long, red cape fluttered behind him, catching the light, emblazoned with a crest I had seen once before. His blade, too bright to be real, rested in his grip like an extension of his own will, as if the concept of a weapon had been crafted around him instead of the other way around. I had seen him before. A fleeting moment in another death, on a bridge bathed in sunset. A presence that had felt like an unshakable force even then. I hadn't known his name. I still didn't. But as he stood between me and the Blood Angel, I knew one thing. For the first time in this cycle, I wasn't alone. A breath I didn't realize I had been holding escaped my lips, shaky, exhausted, but filled with something I hadn't allowed myself to feel until now. Finally, I whispered, my vision blurring. This loop was not meaningless.